Ellie, a mechanic with a sharp eye and a daring heart, never thought much about the town's rumors. When she bought the old, rusted Airfield for pennies on the dollar, the townsfolk laughed at her, mocked her even. But they didn't know what lay beneath the cracked concrete and abandoned hangars. What started as a wild gamble would soon turn into a journey that uncovered secrets so dark, even the bravest wouldn't dare to face them. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this leave you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is going to leave you breathless. Let's get started. Ellie stood at the edge of the overgrown airfield, squinting against the harsh afternoon sunday. The wind kicked up dust, swirling it around the cracked pavement that once saw the roar of propellers and the hum of fighter jets. Now, it was a place where dreams went to die. Rusted fences lined the perimeter, and half of the hangars were collapsed or left to rot in silence. When she'd seen the ad, she thought it was a joke. Old Airfield, $500. But it wasn't. The paperwork was legit. The deal was real. Most of the town thought she was crazy. The mechanic girl, always fiddling with engines, had gone and bought herself an Airfield. But Ellie didn't care about their laughter or their sideways glances. She had a vision. She wasn't here to run a run-of-the-mill car shop. No, this Airfield would be the next big thing, and she would be the one to bring it back to life. The first thing Ellie noticed as she pulled up in her beat-up pickup was the smell. Not the smell of aviation fuel or freshly cut grass, just the smell of old secrets buried beneath layers of dust and dirt. The Airfield had seen better days, but Ellie had learned long ago that things weren't always as they seemed. The moment she stepped out of the truck, she felt the weight of the place settle over her. It was as though the Airfield was holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone, to give it new life. And Ellie knew she was the one to do it. Her fingers brushed over the rusted fence as she made her way toward the hangars, a plan already forming in her mind. It was going to take time, effort, and a whole lot of elbow grease, but she wasn't afraid. The town could laugh all they wanted. She wasn't here to prove them wrong, she was here to prove something to herself. There were no more jokes when she pulled open the gates. The place was hers now, and it was up to her to restore it, piece by piece. The thought of turning the forgotten Airfield into something spectacular felt like electricity under her skin. She didn't know what she was going to find. Maybe there was nothing but broken machinery and crumbling infrastructure. But then again, maybe there was something more, something hidden beneath the dust and rubble, waiting for someone like Ellie to uncover it. As she walked through the abandoned hangars, each step seemed to echo off the walls like a question she didn't yet know how to answer. But one thing was certain. Ellie wasn't about to let this place become another forgotten relic. She grabbed the keys from her pocket, feeling the weight of them in her hand, and walked toward the first hangar with the kind of determination that only came from knowing you were exactly where you needed to be. Ellie's first few days on the Airfield were filled with nothing but silence and dust. The sound of her boots crunching over gravel, the soft hum of her truck's engine as she drove it back and forth from the town, and the occasional creak of the hangars settling in the wind. Everything seemed frozen in time, as though the Airfield was waiting for a spark to ignite it back into life. On the third day, she found the first clue that this place might have more to it than she originally thought. She'd been walking around the perimeter, measuring the land, considering ideas for a runway restoration when she stumbled upon a narrow, overgrown path that led behind one of the old hangars. The door was half open, the rusted metal groaning in protest as she nudged it aside. Inside, it was darker, cooler, and smelled of old wood and stale air. The room was full of forgotten tools, abandoned equipment, and scattered debris. But what caught her attention wasn't the discarded machinery. It was a set of faint markings along the concrete floor, almost hidden beneath the layers of dirt. Ellie crouched down, brushing her fingers over the markings. They were strange, rectangular shapes, some overlapping, others stacked in odd ways, forming a pattern that seemed far too deliberate to be the result of wear and tear. She snapped a picture with her phone and immediately zoomed in. It looked almost like a blueprint, an old one, faded and worn. There was no way this was an accident. Her mind raced. The previous owner had said nothing about this. The Airfield was a relic, Yes. But no one had ever mentioned anything about secret plans or hidden sections. Her curiosity piqued. Ellie set to work cleaning up the area. As she pulled away more debris, a small metal door emerged from beneath the floorboards. It was concealed, tucked out of sight, and completely forgotten. This was no ordinary airfield. It wasn't just the markings. It was the door. Ellie ran her fingers over the rusted handle, feeling the chill of something old and untold. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled. She had found something, whether she was ready to know what it was or not. Her thoughts went back to the locals' whispers, the old stories that spoke of the airfield being more than a landing strip. Some said it had been a military base in its heyday. Others claimed it had been the site of top-secret experiments. No one dared to talk about it much. Maybe, Ellie thought, they weren't just myths. Maybe there was someone who didn't want the truth to be found. Her heart raced, and for the first time since buying the airfield, Ellie felt a hint of doubt. What had she really bought? Was this just a broken-down airfield? Or was there something darker lurking underneath it all? The door was locked, but Ellie had a feeling that whatever lay behind it was the key to understanding this place. She turned and left, determined to return with tools and more answers. Whatever secret this place was hiding, Ellie was going to find it. And she wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how much they mocked her, stop her from uncovering the truth. The airfield felt different the next morning, as if the very earth was holding its breath. Ellie arrived early, the first rays of light spilling over the hangars, casting long shadows across the cracked runway. The metal door behind the hangar, hidden beneath layers of dust and debris, still weighed heavily on her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was calling to her, challenging her to uncover its secrets. But for now, there was work to be done. The place needed clearing, and Ellie needed to prove to herself, if not to the town, that she had made the right decision. She spent the morning repairing the old fence, replacing rusted posts, and filling in gaps with whatever scrap she could find. Every time she swung the hammer, the noise felt louder than it should have been, echoing through the empty field as if announcing her presence to something or someone lurking just out of sight. Around midday, the sound of a car engine rumbled across the lot, breaking her concentration. Ellie looked up to see a figure in a dusty old sedan pull up to the gates. She set down her tools, wiping her brow with the back of her hand as the car rolled to a stop. The man who stepped out was familiar Ben McAllister, the town's resident conspiracy theorist. He was the kind of person who would talk about UFO sightings over coffee or tell wild tales about the airfield's past. Ellie wasn't sure what he wanted, but she'd learned to keep an open mind. "Morning, Ellie," Ben greeted, tipping his worn cap. "Morning," she replied, trying not to sound annoyed. He'd been showing up almost every day lately, offering his expert advice on airfields, aviation, and everything else. She wasn't interested in his ramblings, but he seemed determined to stake his claim as the airfield's unofficial historian. "I heard you bought this place," he said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "Must be nice. But you know, there's more to this land than meets the eye." Ellie crossed her arms. "What do you mean?" Ben's eyes flicked nervously around the airfield, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "People say this airfield wasn't just for planes. It was connected to the government back in the day. Military operations, experiments, you name it." He leaned in closer. "Some folks think there's a bunker underneath. Secretive stuff. A lot of people think it's buried so deep that even the local authorities don't know about it." Ellie's heart skipped a beat. She had heard rumors, of course, but hearing it from Ben, of all people, made it feel like more than just gossip. He wasn't known for making things up, but she still wasn't ready to buy into it. "I don't have time for ghost stories, Ben," she said, trying to brush him off. But he wasn't done. "It's not a story, Ellie. People disappear when they poke around here too much. Just be careful." Ellie stared at him, trying to gauge if he was just being dramatic, or if there was more to his warning. The idea of a bunker hidden beneath the land she'd just purchased made her uneasy. But that wasn't enough to scare her off. If anything, it only fueled her determination. "I'm not scared of a few rumors," she said with a shrug. "I've got work to do." Ben didn't argue. Instead, he gave a knowing look and climbed back into his car, driving off with a cloud of dust in his wake. Ellie watched him go, her mind racing with possibilities. Could there really be a bunker under the airfield? A secret military site? Was this land more than just a broken-down relic? Her instincts screamed at her to investigate. But Ben's warning lingered in her thoughts. People disappearing? That wasn't just paranoia. That was real. Ellie pushed the thought aside, determined to focus on what she could control. She had a field to fix, a dream to build, and a future to carve out for herself. But she knew one thing for certain now: this wasn't just any ordinary airfield. And she wasn't the only one who knew it. The days blurred together as Ellie threw herself into work. Each morning began early, and each night ended late, her muscles aching, her hands stained with grease and sweat. But the airfield was starting to show signs of life again. The fences were mended, the weeds cleared, and the hangars, though still in disrepair, began to feel less like tombs and more like potential. Ellie wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew it was going to take every ounce of energy she had to make this place something worth believing in. It was the middle of the week when Ellie met the man who would change everything. She was in the back corner of the airfield, struggling with an ancient fuel pump, when she heard the creak of boots on gravel. She glanced over her shoulder and saw an older man standing at the edge of the runway, his eyes scanning the expanse with a sort of quiet reverence. His weathered face was framed by a silver beard, and he wore a leather jacket that had clearly seen better days. There was something familiar about him, though Ellie couldn't place it. He cleared his throat, catching her attention. "You're Ellie, right?" She wiped her hands on her shirt and stood up, brushing off the dirt. "Yeah. Can I help you?" The man smiled faintly, his gaze shifting from the fuel pump to the rest of the field. "I used to work here, back when it was still operational." He hesitated for a moment, as if weighing whether or not to continue. "Name's Frank." Ellie raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Used to work here? When was that?" Frank took a step closer, his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. "A long time ago," he said quietly, as though the words themselves were heavy. "Before the place got abandoned. I helped with the plane's maintenance, repairs, anything they needed. I knew this place better than most." Ellie glanced over her shoulder at the empty hangars. "You're telling me you worked here when it was still running?" Frank nodded. "I did." His eyes seemed distant as he looked past her, as though remembering something he didn't want to. This airfield saw more than its fair share of secrets. Some of them still linger around here. People don't like to talk about it, but there's a reason this place was shut down so suddenly. Ellie's curiosity flared. She'd heard the rumors from Ben and others in town, but hearing them from someone who'd actually worked here made them feel far more real. "What kind of secrets?" Ellie asked, her voice low. Frank's expression darkened. "The kind that don't belong in the public eye. Some say it was just military stuff, planes, weapons, all that. But there was more than that. Much more. And I'd be careful poking around, girl." He gave her a long, serious look. "Not everyone wants what's hidden here to be found." Ellie's chest tightened. She hadn't expected him to be so blunt, but the warning wasn't lost on her. She'd already uncovered a hidden door beneath the hangar, and now Frank's cryptic words made her even more determined to find out what was lurking underneath. "I'm not afraid of a few secrets," Ellie said, standing taller, despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "I'm here to fix this place up, and I'm not going to back down now." Frank seemed to study her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "That's the spirit, I suppose. Just don't say I didn't warn you." He turned to leave, but paused. "There's a lot buried out here, Ellie. It's up to you whether you want to dig it all up." With that, he walked away, disappearing back into the shadows of the airfield as quietly as he had come. Ellie stood there, the airfield stretching before her, and for the first time, she wondered if maybe Frank was right. Maybe there was more than just an abandoned airstrip beneath her feet, but there was something in his words, something that rang true. If there was one thing Ellie had learned from years of working on old cars and broken engines, it was that the truth wasn't always easy to find, and it certainly wasn't going to come to her willingly. The bunker, the secrets, Frank's warning. They were all pieces of the same puzzle, and Ellie was going to solve it, no matter the cost. Ellie couldn't shake Frank's words. The airfield was no longer just a dusty old relic. There was something more to it, something buried deep beneath the surface. His warning replayed in her mind like a broken record. She had already found one secret, a hidden door beneath the hangar floor. She wasn't sure what it led to yet, but she knew one thing for sure. It wasn't an accident. The next morning, after a few hours of sleep and a cup of the worst coffee she'd ever had, Ellie returned to the hangar with a plan. She needed to get into that hidden space. She wasn't sure what she would find, but every instinct in her told her it was something important. The airfield was still quiet as she made her way to the back hangar, the wind carrying a sense of foreboding through the cracks in the old walls. Ellie reached the metal door, the same one she had discovered days ago. Her heart raced as she bent down to examine the lock. It was old, but sturdy. Whoever had put it there had wanted to keep it shut for a reason. Determined, Ellie grabbed her tools and began working at the lock, her fingers moving quickly, her mind focused on the task at hand. The old lock creaked as it finally gave way. The door swung open with a groan, revealing a small, dimly lit room beyond. She stepped inside, the air cold and stale, filled with the scent of damp wood and something metallic. The room was lined with old crates and rusted equipment tools, machines, things Ellie couldn't even identify. She shone her flashlight around, searching for any sign of what had been hidden here all those years ago. But it wasn't the crates that caught her attention. It was the walls. The faint markings she had seen earlier in the hangar rectangular shapes, stacked in odd patterns, were painted along the concrete, faded, but still visible. They weren't random. They were deliberate. Someone had left a message, and Ellie was starting to understand that it wasn't just the airfield that had been abandoned, it was the truth that had been buried with it. She traced her fingers along the markings, following them across the wall until she found a small, rusted panel embedded into the concrete. A hidden switch. With a deep breath, she pressed it. The wall shuddered, and slowly, a portion of the floor began to rise, revealing a hidden hatch. Ellie's pulse quickened. This was it. The bunker, just like Frank had mentioned. With trembling hands, she swung open the hatch, the metal creaking as it gave way to a darkened stairwell leading underground. Ellie hesitated, her mind racing with a million questions. Was this where the military had conducted their experiments? What had been stored here? And why was it kept so carefully hidden for so long? With a deep breath, she stepped forward, gripping the flashlight tighter as she descended into the unknown. The air grew colder, the deeper she went, and the silence pressed against her ears, almost suffocating. The further she descended, the more the walls seemed to close in. Ellie's heart beat faster with each step, her instincts telling her that whatever lay below was going to change everything, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. At the bottom of the stairs, Ellie found herself standing in front of a large steel door. It was unlike anything she had seen before, thick, reinforced, with an electronic keypad beside it. This was no ordinary underground storage. Whatever was behind this door, it was meant to be protected. Her fingers hovered over the keypad, but she didn't know the code. She could feel the weight of the place, the sense of purpose that had gone into hiding whatever lay behind it. Ellie had come this far. She wasn't about to back out now. Her flashlight flickered as she stepped closer, examining the keypad. There had to be a way in. She pressed her palm against the cold metal of the door, the pulse of something ancient vibrating through the air. This was it. This was the heart of the airfield's secrets, and it was calling her to uncover what had been buried here so many years ago. Ellie stood in front of the reinforced steel door, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the keypad. The cold, smooth surface of the metal sent a chill through her, and for a moment, she wondered if she was in over her head. But the growing curiosity inside her couldn't be ignored. There was something in here. Something important. She just had to figure out how to unlock it. She spent the next hour trying every combination of numbers she could think of, pressing the buttons one after another, her frustration growing with each failure. The keypad's red light flickered and buzzed in irritation, but Ellie refused to give up. She felt like she was on the brink of something monumental. Then, she noticed something, a small, almost imperceptible scratch on the wall beside the door. It was so faint that at first, she thought it was just dirt. But as she leaned closer, her flashlight illuminating the marks, she realized they formed a pattern rectangular shapes, just like the ones she had seen on the hangar walls. It clicked, in her mind. This was no ordinary keypad. This was a puzzle. Her breath caught as she pieced it together. The shapes on the wall matched the sequence on the keypad. She quickly traced the pattern with her fingers, pressing the corresponding buttons in the exact order. The moment her finger hit the last button, the door let out a low hum, and the keypad blinked green. The steel door shuddered, then slowly, quietly, began to open. Ellie's heart raced as she pushed the door wide, revealing what lay beyond. The dim light from her flashlight illuminated a vast, cold room. Shelves lined the walls, filled with dusty, forgotten equipment. There were crates, some open, revealing long-forgotten tools and materials that had been left undisturbed for years. But what caught Ellie's attention wasn't the clutter, it was the center of the room. In the middle stood an enormous metal cabinet, old and rusted, but still standing strong. Ellie's mind spun with questions. What was this? And why had it been hidden here, in a forgotten bunker beneath an airfield? She moved toward it cautiously, each step echoing in the silence of the underground chamber. The cabinet's surface was covered in strange markings, more of those same rectangular shapes she had seen on the walls above. Her flashlight flickered again, casting eerie shadows around the room, as if warning her not to approach. But Ellie didn't listen. She had come this far. She needed to know what was inside. The cabinet door was locked, but there was no keypad this time, just a rusted handle that was almost completely covered in grime. She wiped it off, the cold metal sending a shiver down her spine. Her hand closed around the handle, and with a deep breath, she pulled. The door groaned in protest as it slowly opened, revealing what lay inside. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. At first, she thought it was just more equipment, more relics of the past. But as her flashlight swept across the interior, she realized there was something far more significant hidden here. The cabinet was filled with stacks of old files, thick manila envelopes, yellowed with age. And there, in the center of it all, was something that took her breath away. A thick, leather-bound journal. Her fingers shook as she reached for it, pulling it out carefully. The cover was worn, but the pages inside were still intact. As she flipped it open, she saw the handwriting neat, precise, and incredibly detailed. The first few pages were filled with technical diagrams, blueprints for what looked like military aircraft and machinery. But as she turned more pages, the nature of the journal shifted. There were references to experiments, coded language, and references to Project Falcon, a project Ellie had never heard of before. It spoke of something far darker than the airfield, something that had been tested here, under the radar. The last entry was the most chilling of all. Operation complete. Subject has been successfully contained. Future tests to continue off-site. Ellie's stomach twisted as she closed the journal, her mind racing. What had she just uncovered? What were they testing here? And why had this been kept hidden for so long? As she stood there, holding the journal in her hands, a cold realization washed over her. She wasn't just fixing up an old airfield anymore. She had uncovered something that no one was supposed to know. A hidden chapter of the airfield's history, buried deep beneath layers of concrete and secrecy. And Ellie was the one who had found it. Ellie sat in the dimly lit room, the leather-bound journal resting heavily in her lap. Her flashlight flickered above her, casting erratic shadows on the walls. The rest of the bunker felt suffocating, almost as if it was closing in on her, demanding that she leave, that she forget what she'd found. But Ellie knew she couldn't walk away. Not now, not when she was this close. The journal's pages were filled with fragments of stories, some of which didn't make sense, others that were too coded for her to fully decipher. She scanned through the entries, each one more cryptic than the last. But the underlying theme was clear. This place wasn't just an airfield. It had been a testing ground, a site for experiments far more sinister than anyone had ever realized. One entry caught her attention more than the rest. Subject Falcon Phase 3 complete. Moved to new location for final testing. The words haunted her. Subject Falcon. Was that the name of a person? A project? The questions in Ellie's mind were multiplying faster than she could answer them. Whoever had left these notes had gone to great lengths to ensure that the airfield's secrets stayed hidden. But Ellie had uncovered a small part of the truth, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. Not now. She turned the journal over in her hands, tracing the edges of the worn cover. There was something more here, something important. It wasn't just the experiments that mattered, it was the legacy of this place. Whoever had been involved in these projects had gone to great lengths to erase their tracks, to bury the truth in layers of secrecy. But Ellie had uncovered a piece of the puzzle, and she knew she couldn't stop until she found the rest. Determined, she rose to her feet, the journal clutched tightly in her hands. She needed answers, and she wasn't about to let anyone stop her from finding them. As she made her way back toward the stairs, her mind raced with the implications of what she'd uncovered. This wasn't just about an old airfield. This was about something much bigger. Something that could change everything. And Ellie knew that if she wanted to finish what she'd started, she would have to dig even deeper. But she wasn't alone in this. She could feel it. The airfield wasn't just abandoned. It was being watched. And whoever was keeping an eye on it wouldn't be happy that Ellie had found the bunker. As she reached the top of the stairs, Ellie glanced back one last time at the door she had just opened. The silence seemed louder now, as though the entire bunker was holding its breath, waiting for something. She wasn't sure what she was up against, but she was certain of one thing. She wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. Ellie didn't sleep that night. The weight of the journal, the discoveries, and the creeping suspicion that something was watching her kept her awake. Every creak of the floorboards and every gust of wind outside, sending her pulse into overdrive. The airfield felt like a living, breathing entity, its secrets coiled tight beneath the surface, waiting to spring. And Ellie, now more determined than ever, knew she had to uncover them all. By the time the sun rose, casting a pale light over the dilapidated airfield, Ellie was already working. Her tools were scattered around the hangar as she tried to make sense of the bunker's contents. She wasn't sure where to begin. The journal, filled with fragmented notes and half-formed ideas, had given her some direction, but the pieces were scattered. That was when she heard the car. A lone engine sputtered from the distance, growing louder, cutting through the morning silence. Ellie's stomach tightened. She knew that sound. She had heard it the day Ben McAllister had warned her about the airfield's secrets. Her heart skipped a beat when she recognized the car as it pulled into the lot, the same old sedan. Ben was back. This time, though, he wasn't alone. The car skidded to a halt in front of the gates, the dust swirling in the wake of the tires. Ben stepped out, his weathered face serious, his usual joking demeanor absent. But it was the man who stepped out after him that caught Ellie off guard. He was tall, his face shadowed by a dark hat and a black trench coat. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the airfield with a professional precision, like someone who had seen it all before. There was something about him that made Ellie's skin crawl, something that made her heart race in warning. Ben made his way toward Ellie, but the stranger didn't follow. Instead, he stood near the gates, observing her with an unnerving stillness. "You should have listened to me," Ben said, his voice low. "This place, it's not just an airfield. You're digging into things you don't understand, things that could get you hurt." Ellie straightened, trying to ignore the man standing behind Ben. "What's going on, Ben? Who's this?" The man in the trench coat finally stepped forward, his cold gaze never leaving her. "You're asking the wrong questions," he said, his voice like gravel. "You need to stop digging. This is bigger than you think. Bigger than anything you could possibly imagine." Ellie's pulse quickened. The airfield wasn't just a forgotten relic. It wasn't just an abandoned project. It was something far more dangerous. She knew that now. "I'm not afraid of a few secrets," Ellie shot back, her voice steady despite the growing unease in her stomach. "I'm here to uncover the truth, and I'm not backing down." The man's lips twisted into a thin smile. "You don't get to decide when this ends. You've already opened a door that shouldn't have been opened. Now, you're going to have to deal with the consequences." Ellie's grip on the journal tightened. The fear that had been slowly creeping up her spine started to solidify into something else. Anger. Determination. She wasn't going to be intimidated by these people. They could threaten her all they wanted, But Ellie wasn't the kind of person to back down from a challenge. Not anymore. The man turned away, his cold eyes flicking toward the hangars. "You've been warned," he said, his voice low. "I suggest you walk away now, before it's too late." As the man walked back toward the car, Ben hesitated, glancing back at Ellie with an apologetic look, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. Ellie wasn't going to walk away. Not now. She had come too far. And whatever secrets they were trying to bury, whatever dangers they were trying to keep hidden, she was going to find them, no matter the cost. Ellie didn't wait long before she decided to take action. The man in the trench coat had left, but his warning had carved itself into her mind. She couldn't pretend that the stakes weren't high anymore. There was something beneath this airfield, something dangerous and important, and she wasn't about to let anyone, no matter how intimidating, scare her away from finding it. She spent the rest of the day working in silence, the heavy weight of the journal in her hands as she pored over its pages. The more she read, the clearer it became. The experiments mentioned in the journal weren't just about military weapons or technology. They were about control, manipulating someone, for purposes that Ellie could hardly comprehend. But whatever it was, it had been hidden here for a reason, and the people who had been involved had made sure that no one would ever find out. By dusk, Ellie had made up her mind. She would confront the people behind the airfield's secrets. It was time to stop running from the truth. She gathered her tools, grabbed the journal, and made her way back to the bunker. The cool night air felt like a cloak around her, wrapping her in the tension of the moment. The silence of the airfield was almost suffocating as she walked, the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders. When she reached the bunker's entrance, Ellie paused for a moment, her fingers brushing the cold metal of the door. It was now or never. She knew what she had to do, but that didn't make the fear any less real. Whoever these people were, they weren't just trying to scare her off. They were hiding something that could change everything, and Ellie was going to be the one to expose it. The door creaked open with a familiar groan as Ellie stepped inside. The stale air of the underground chamber hit her immediately. She shone her flashlight around, taking in the abandoned shelves, the broken equipment, and the lingering remnants of something long forgotten. The room felt like a tomb, except it wasn't empty. It was filled with memories, with whispers of a past that refused to stay buried. As she moved deeper into the bunker, Ellie felt the presence of someone else, someone who had been waiting for her. The sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber, slow and deliberate. Ellie froze, her heart racing. She wasn't alone. Someone was here. "Did you think you could uncover all of this and walk away unscathed?" The voice was low and familiar, the man in the trench coat. He was standing at the far end of the bunker, his figure half shadowed by the dim light. Ellie's pulse quickened. "You don't scare me," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. The man chuckled darkly. "You should be scared. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Ellie took a step forward. "I'm not leaving until I know the truth." The man's eyes flicked to the journal she was holding, his expression hardening. "That's not just a journal. It's a record of everything that happened here. And what happened here was never meant to be remembered." "I don't care what it was meant to be," Ellie replied, her voice steady now. "It's in my hands now, and I'm not backing down." He moved toward her, his steps slow but deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. Ellie's grip on the journal tightened, but she didn't back away. She stood her ground, her breath steady despite the fear gnawing at the back of her mind. The man stopped a few feet from her, his eyes locked onto hers. "You don't know what's at stake. This isn't about you, Ellie. This is about something much bigger than your little airfield project. The people involved in this, they're not just going to let you walk away with that journal. You've already uncovered too much." Ellie's heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to flinch. "Then I'll fight. Because I'm not just uncovering secrets. I'm uncovering lives that were ruined by whatever happened here, and I'm going to make sure it all comes out." The man stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a sudden movement, he stepped back. "You've made a dangerous choice, Ellie, but it's not too late to walk away. It's not too late to leave this place and forget everything you've learned." Ellie stood firm. "I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you." For a moment, the man said nothing. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the shadows. Ellie watched him disappear into the darkness, her breath still heavy in her chest. She had confronted the enemy, but the battle was far from over. There were still more questions than answers, and Ellie knew she was only just beginning to uncover the full extent of the danger she had stepped into. But there was no turning back now. She had made her choice, and she wasn't going to stop until she had uncovered the full truth. Ellie stood alone in the dim light of the bunker, the sound of her breath the only thing that filled the heavy silence. The man in the trench coat was gone, but his words echoed in her mind, a constant reminder of the dangers that lay ahead. She stared down at the journal in her hands, the leather cover worn but sturdy, the weight of what it contained pressed against her chest, as if the very history of the airfield was trying to push its way out. The truth was buried deep beneath layers of concrete, hidden in the shadows of a past that no one wanted to confront. But Ellie had confronted it. She had uncovered the first pieces of the puzzle, and she wasn't about to stop now. She glanced around the bunker, taking in the rows of old crates and boxes that lined the walls. There was more here, she could feel it. But where should she look? What else had been hidden? What else had been erased? Her eyes fell on a small, rusted file cabinet tucked into the corner of the room. It had been there all along, almost blending into the shadows. Ellie approached it slowly, her fingers trembling as she opened the drawer. Inside, there were more files, more documents, more blueprints. Each piece seemed to fit into the puzzle she was piecing together. One folder caught her attention, marked with a red stamp that read, "Top Secret." Ellie's heart raced as she pulled it out, flipping it open. The first page was filled with detailed diagrams of the airfield and its hidden features. But it wasn't just an airfield. It was a map, one that led to something far more valuable, far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. As Ellie scanned the pages, the words jumped out at her. Project Falcon Phase 4. Final testing. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Project Falcon, the same project mentioned in the journal. But now it was clear. This wasn't just some military experiment. This was something else. The project had involved more than just aircraft. It had involved people. People who had been used, manipulated, and discarded. Ellie's mind spun as she read further. The final phase of the project had been marked as complete, but there were references to ongoing operations, notes that suggested the project was far from over. Final testing. What did that mean? And why had it been hidden here, beneath an old airfield, for all these years? The answer was in the last page of the folder. Subject Falcon. Initiate Phase 5. Relocate to secure location. Ellie slammed the folder shut, her breath catching in her throat. This was bigger than she had thought. She wasn't just uncovering a buried project. She was discovering a legacy of secrets, a chain of events that had been set in motion long before she ever bought this airfield, and the people behind it weren't going to let it end now. She felt a presence before she heard the footsteps. The hair on the back of her neck stood up as she turned slowly, her eyes locking with the man in the trench coat. He was standing in the doorway, his gaze cold and steady. "You've uncovered too much," he said, his voice low, almost regretful. "It's over, Ellie. You don't understand what you're dealing with." Ellie gripped the folder tighter. "I understand perfectly. You've been hiding something. Something that people deserve to know. I won't let you bury it again." The man didn't move, his expression unreadable. "You think you can stop this? You think you're the hero in this story? There's no hero here, Ellie. Only people trying to survive in a world that doesn't care about them. And you're just another pawn in a game that's been played long before you ever stepped onto this airfield." Ellie's voice grew stronger, the weight of her discoveries giving her the courage to speak her truth. "Maybe I'm not a hero, but I'm not a pawn, either. I'm the one who's going to make sure people know what happened here, and I'm not stopping until the world knows the truth." For the first time, the man's expression flickered just a hint of hesitation in his eyes. Then, he stepped back, his shoulders sagging as if he'd finally accepted something. You don't know what you're asking for. Ellie didn't answer. She didn't need to. She knew what she was asking for. She was asking for justice, for truth, for a chance to make right what had been buried for so long. With a final, tense silence between them, the man turned and left, disappearing into the darkness of the bunker. Ellie stood there, staring at the empty doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had uncovered the truth. The legacy of the Airfield was out in the open now, and no one could take it back. Ellie took a deep breath, holding the folder close to her chest. The weight of the world had shifted, and the burden was now hers to carry. But for the first time since she'd stepped foot on this land, Ellie didn't feel afraid. She felt ready.